The air in the room was heavy, thick with tension, and Serena Williams didn't even know how to start. She had kept silent for months, years, really, but the truth had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. And what she was about to reveal wasn't just a minor grievance. It was explosive, dangerous, even. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they had been weaving a web of manipulation behind your back? That's exactly what Serena experienced, and what she finally chose to make public. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The first time the world got a glimpse of the complex relationship between Serena Williams and Meghan Markle, it seemed like a fairy tale. Hollywood stars mingling, charity galas, laughter echoing down red-carpeted halls. They appeared inseparable. They shared causes, fashion moments, even whispered jokes on stage in front of cameras. But appearances, as Serena soon learned, could be deceiving. The cracks were subtle at first, small comments here, a strange hesitation there, but they compounded over time into something unmistakable. Serena was dealing with a person who was strategic, manipulative, and, in Serena's words, dangerous. You might be wondering why now? Why break this silence after years of maintaining a neutral front? The answer is simple. Actions have consequences, and Meghan's latest behavior crossed a line that Serena could no longer ignore. Friends were caught in uncomfortable positions. Public perception was being carefully shaped by a narrative Serena knew wasn't the whole truth, and the people closest to the story were left in silent frustration. There's a reason the media had been whispering about tension behind the scenes for months, and now Serena finally decided to pull back the curtain. It started with small incidents, almost forgettable at first. A canceled dinner without explanation, a comment that seemed innocent but carried a hidden edge, a subtle attempt to control how Serena was perceived by others in their shared social and professional circles. On paper, these were minor. But to Serena, someone whose life had always been in the public eye, where loyalty and trust were everything, these small fissures quickly became glaring red flags. She began questioning every interaction, wondering if the warmth and smiles were genuine, or if they were carefully choreographed to serve Meghan's personal agenda. And then came the confrontations. They weren't public at first. Serena tried to handle things privately, hoping that direct communication could mend what seemed to be unraveling. But Meghan had a way of sidestepping accountability, redirecting conversations, and creating narratives that placed her firmly in the victim's role while subtly casting doubt on Serena's judgment. It's a skill that the public rarely sees, a mastery of social dynamics that can charm entire rooms while quietly isolating key individuals. Serena experienced it firsthand, and it left her feeling not only betrayed but also alarmed. Have you ever watched someone you trusted carefully orchestrate a scene, ensuring that no one else sees the subtle manipulation? That's what Serena began to notice. The casual compliments, the gentle nudges, the soft-spoken suggestions, they were all part of a larger pattern. And while Meghan maintained a public image of warmth and charisma, the private reality was far different. It was a dissonance that few could detect, but Serena, with her sharp intuition and years of navigating the pressures of fame, felt it immediately. And she understood that remaining silent was no longer a neutral choice. It was complicity. Then came the tipping point. A specific incident, one that Serena recalls vividly, made her realize that this was no longer a private matter. Something happened in a seemingly ordinary setting. A charity event, a casual meeting, a friendly gathering. But the layers of manipulation were exposed in a way that was impossible to ignore. Secrets that Serena thought were safe were being used strategically. Words were twisted, intentions were questioned. And in that moment, Serena made a decision. She would no longer allow herself, or anyone else, to be misled. She would speak out. And when she did, she used words that left no room for misinterpretation, manipulative, dangerous, untrustworthy. This is the moment where most people would pause and ask, why would Serena Williams, one of the most private and controlled figures in celebrity culture, break her silence now? The answer is as dramatic as the revelation itself. Meghan's recent actions were escalating, affecting not just Serena's personal perception, but potentially influencing wider networks in Hollywood and beyond. Mutual friends, collaborators, and even fans were starting to feel the tension. Serena realized that if she didn't address the situation publicly, the narrative would be shaped entirely by Meghan, and it would be a version of events that was deeply misleading, if not entirely false. And so, the decision was made. But making the decision is only half the battle. What followed were days of careful deliberation, conversations with trusted confidants, legal advisors, and long-standing friends. Serena considered the potential fallout: public scrutiny, backlash, and the inevitable media frenzy. Yet, despite the risks, the truth weighed heavier. The public deserved to know at least part of the story, and Serena had a responsibility to herself, to her friends, and to those who might otherwise be caught in similar webs of influence. Let's pause and consider what this tells us about human behavior. Even people in positions of immense power and respect can fall victim to manipulation. Even the strongest, most disciplined, most successful individuals, like Serena Williams, can be tested by relationships that play on trust, perception, and influence. And when those tests involve someone as strategically aware as Meghan Markle, the stakes rise exponentially. It becomes a chess match, with public appearances as pawns and personal relationships as the high-value pieces. Watching Serena navigate this reality provides a rare insight into the hidden dynamics of celebrity friendships and the quiet, sometimes sinister, power plays that occur behind closed doors. Now, imagine the moment the world hears Serena's statement for the first time. Months of silence, carefully curated, finally broken. The words were precise, the tone measured but firm, the impact instantaneous. Social media exploded, entertainment outlets scrambled, and fans around the world were forced to reevaluate what they thought they knew about both women. But even beyond the headlines and tweets, the personal truth for Serena was far more intense. She was done, absolutely done, and the words she chose weren't just a declaration. They were a line drawn in the sand, a public acknowledgement that some betrayals cannot be overlooked, no matter how high the stakes or how complex the relationships. And yet, as the story begins to unfold, we have to ask ourselves, what drove Serena to keep silent for so long? What were the private moments she endured before the public revelation? And, most importantly, what did she learn about human nature, trust, and betrayal that the rest of us may never fully grasp? These questions set the stage for the detailed chapters that follow, where every layer of this relationship, every shocking revelation, and every calculated maneuver will be explored in depth. Each chapter peels back the layers of a complex, high-stakes drama that goes far beyond what the cameras capture on the red carpet. How did Serena Williams, one of the most fiercely independent and accomplished athletes in the world, form a bond with Meghan Markle, someone who, at first glance, seemed more Hollywood than tennis court? On paper, the two couldn't have been more different. Serena, grounded, disciplined, and brutally honest. Meghan, charismatic, media-savvy, and endlessly strategic. Yet somehow, their worlds collided in ways that seemed almost cinematic. It all started at a charity gala in Los Angeles, an event Serena attended reluctantly. She had been focused on training, tournaments, and family obligations, but the gala was unavoidable, a prestigious night, filled with celebrities, influencers, and power players. Meghan was there, effortlessly charming, commanding attention with her elegance and eloquence. When their paths crossed, it was electric, but not in the romanticized, tabloids-painted kind of way. It was an instant recognition, two ambitious women who understood the nuances of public life, the weight of expectations, and the art of carefully navigating visibility. At first, their interactions were casual. Small talk about causes, mutual acquaintances, and career ambitions. Meghan, ever the conversational tactician, asked Serena about her philanthropic work, her recent victories, and her plans outside the tennis court. Serena, unaccustomed to such targeted interest, felt a spark of curiosity. Here was someone who seemed genuinely interested in her life, but also remarkably aware of how to frame the conversation. In hindsight, that awareness was the first thread of what Serena would later identify as manipulation, but in the beginning, it felt refreshing, validating, and even exciting. Soon, their casual interactions turned into more personal conversations. Over coffee dates, dinner meetings, and private gatherings, Serena and Meghan discussed everything from sports to social issues to the challenges of maintaining privacy under intense media scrutiny. Serena, who had been intensely protective of her personal space and inner circle, found herself opening up. For someone like Serena, that was not insignificant. Opening up meant trust, and trust was never given lightly. Meghan seemed to understand this implicitly, asking the right questions, listening carefully, and subtly guiding the narrative in ways that made Serena feel heard. But this early stage, the honeymoon phase of their friendship, would later be scrutinized in ways neither woman could have predicted. The public also noticed their chemistry. Paparazzi photos of the two laughing at events, attending premieres together, and supporting each other's causes painted a picture of an inseparable duo. Fans and media alike speculated on the depth of their bond, praising the camaraderie between two high-profile women navigating their respective worlds. Serena's athletic achievements and Meghan's Hollywood career created a compelling, almost storybook dynamic, the athlete and the actress, united by ambition and vision. But beneath the curated smiles, the friendship was quietly setting the stage for something much more complicated. Their friendship deepened when they began collaborating on charitable endeavors. Serena's focus on youth empowerment and Meghan's work with social justice initiatives seemed complementary. They discussed co-hosting events, fundraising campaigns, and joint media projects. For Serena, this was exhilarating, a partnership with someone who not only understood her world but also seemed willing to amplify her impact. Meghan's involvement was subtle but strategic, ensuring she remained visible yet never overshadowed Serena. At the time, Serena interpreted this as respect. Looking back, she would see it as a calculated effort to maintain influence over her perception. What truly cemented the bond in the eyes of outsiders was how they supported each other in public moments. Serena, always aware of how the media could twist even a minor comment, felt a sense of relief having Meghan in her corner. Meghan, on the other hand, had mastered the art of presence. She knew when to compliment, when to challenge, and when to step back. Their appearances together were flawless. Every laugh, every shoulder brush, every subtle glance was a lesson in optics and media strategy. It was the kind of friendship that the public admired, effortless, elegant, and seemingly genuine. Yet, Serena's intuition never fully rested. She noticed patterns, subtle and almost imperceptible. Meghan would casually steer conversations, plan ideas, or frame narratives in ways that Serena initially chalked up to coincidence or charisma. It wasn't overt. It wasn't aggressive. But it was deliberate. Over time, these patterns became more pronounced, like small tremors before an earthquake. Serena trusted her instincts, honed over decades of navigating competitive sports, media scrutiny, and high-stakes environments. She began cataloging behaviors in her mind, noting inconsistencies and subtle manipulations. The turning point in the friendship came during a particularly high-profile charity event. Both women were scheduled to speak, to present awards, and to mingle with high-powered attendees. In front of hundreds of guests and countless cameras, Meghan's charisma was on full display. She delivered eloquent remarks, navigated questions with precision, and engaged the crowd effortlessly. Serena, initially proud of her friend, began to notice subtle undertones. Remarks that seemed complimentary on the surface but carried a hidden edge, positioning Serena in ways that subtly suggested dependency or vulnerability. These were small things, the phrasing of compliments, the timing of jokes, the way Meghan controlled the flow of attention. It was almost imperceptible to an outsider, but Serena felt it immediately. That night, after the gala, Serena reflected quietly on the dynamics of their friendship. She remembered a specific moment when Meghan complimented her on an initiative, but the comment was delivered in a way that implied Serena could not succeed without Meghan's approval or support. At the time, Serena laughed it off, but the memory lingered, planting a seed of doubt. She began questioning whether the connection was mutual admiration or a strategic alignment that served Meghan's interests more than her own. Despite these early warning signs, the friendship persisted. Serena valued companionship, especially with someone who appeared to understand the unique pressures of fame. Meghan's intelligence, charm, and strategic awareness were undeniably magnetic. Serena, like anyone in her position, craved authentic connection, but the question remained. How authentic was this friendship? And how much of it was orchestrated for influence, optics, and control? From a public perspective, the friendship was enviable. Social media buzzed with posts highlighting the duo's activities, appearances, and shared initiatives. Headlines praised them as role models for women everywhere, showing that high-profile friendships could thrive amidst fame, competition, and intense scrutiny. Fans speculated on their camaraderie, admired the mutual support, and celebrated the seemingly unbreakable bond. But the public never saw the subtle micro-shifts, the comments that planted doubt, the gentle steering of attention, or the private manipulations that would later define Serena's perception of the friendship. By the time Serena began noticing these patterns, it was already too late to revert to simple camaraderie. The bond had developed layers, woven through public appearances, private collaborations, and mutual introductions to other influential figures. Serena had invested trust, time, and emotional energy into the friendship. Meghan had done the same, but with a different agenda. It was not malicious in the way most people imagine. It was calculated, strategic, and precise. Every gesture, every word, every smile was designed to serve a larger narrative. One that Serena would ultimately realize was dangerous. Even in these early stages, Serena's instincts were sharp. She observed, analyzed, and cataloged behaviors. She recognized charm when it was genuine and manipulation when it was calculated. The juxtaposition was dizzying. Meghan could inspire loyalty, admiration, and affection while simultaneously bending situations to her favor. Serena began to understand the stakes. Not just for herself, but for the broader network of friends, allies, and colleagues who could be subtly influenced. The friendship, as enchanting as it seemed, carried hidden risks. And yet, Serena remained invested. She believed that honesty, directness, and open dialogue could preserve their connection. She valued friendship and was willing to navigate complexity for the sake of trust. It was a gamble, a calculated risk that would ultimately pay off in clarity, though not in the way she expected. Because what Serena would come to discover in the months and years following this initial connection would change everything. The story of how Serena Williams and Meghan Markle became friends is not merely a tale of celebrity encounters or Hollywood glamour. It is a story of trust, intuition, and the delicate balance of human relationships in high-stakes environments. It is about how even the most accomplished, intelligent, and perceptive individuals can be tested by the subtle influence of someone who knows exactly how to shape perception. How do you recognize manipulation when it's subtle, almost invisible? For Serena Williams, it didn't arrive in a single dramatic moment. It unfolded gradually, in whispers, pauses, and small remarks that, at first, seemed innocuous. But over time, these little fissures became impossible to ignore. The first red flags in her friendship with Meghan Markle were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet their impact was profound, shaking the foundation of a relationship Serena had once considered trustworthy. It began with seemingly small incidents at social gatherings. Serena had attended countless events in her career: galas, award shows, charity fundraisers, and press conferences. She had honed the skill of reading people, detecting hidden agendas, and identifying genuine connections versus superficial interactions. Meghan's behavior, however, introduced a new layer of complexity. A compliment that lingered too long, a story that conveniently shifted focus from Serena to Meghan, a laugh that seemed slightly too rehearsed. All of these were minor individually. But together, they created a pattern that Serena could feel instinctively, even if she couldn't articulate it at first. The first incident that truly caught Serena's attention occurred during a private dinner with mutual friends. Meghan, ever poised, directed the conversation in ways that subtly minimized Serena's achievements. Comments that were framed as compliments carried underlying suggestions that Serena's success was somehow incomplete without Meghan's support or acknowledgement. At the time, Serena laughed it off, attributing it to Meghan's charm or perhaps her own sensitivity. Yet, later reflection revealed the intention behind those remarks. They were carefully constructed to instill doubt, to subtly suggest dependency, and to position Meghan as the guiding force in their friendship. Have you ever had someone in your life who seemed perfectly charming, but left you questioning your own instincts? Serena did. These small manipulations were like tiny cracks in a mirror. The reflection looked the same, but the surface was fractured. The experience was disorienting. She noticed how Meghan would bring up past conversations or decisions in a way that reframed them to her advantage. Words that had seemed neutral or supportive were now revealed to carry hidden meanings. Serena, who trusted her instincts implicitly, began to feel the first stirrings of doubt, the quiet anxiety that comes when you suspect someone's intentions are not entirely pure. It wasn't just private interactions that raised alarms. Public appearances began to show patterns as well. At charity events and award shows, Meghan would subtly redirect attention, highlighting Serena's achievements only to draw comparisons to her own efforts or to cast Serena as overly dependent on public approval. These actions, while subtle, were noticeable to someone with Serena's experience. She had always thrived in high-pressure situations, where perception mattered as much as performance, and she recognized the calculated precision behind Meghan's gestures. The first red flag that truly shook Serena came during a collaborative event they had co-hosted for a social justice initiative. The project was designed to highlight both of their causes, to leverage their combined influence for maximum impact. But behind the scenes, Meghan began steering key decisions in ways that Serena had not anticipated. Invitations were subtly modified, speaking roles adjusted, and even messaging framed to amplify Meghan's profile, while minimizing Serena's contributions. Serena's initial reaction was confusion. Why would someone she trusted act in this way? But over time, the pattern became clear. These were not accidents. These were deliberate, strategic maneuvers. Serena also noticed an emerging habit in Meghan of using empathy as a tool. On the surface, Meghan appeared caring, attentive, and supportive. But in private conversations, she would frame issues in a way that shifted responsibility subtly onto Serena, creating guilt or doubt. It wasn't overt manipulation. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible redirection of trust and responsibility. Serena, who had faced media scrutiny, public criticism, and personal challenges throughout her career, recognized this tactic immediately. It was psychological subtlety at its finest, a way of gaining influence without confrontation. Another early warning sign involved mutual friends. Serena observed how Meghan would plant seeds of doubt subtly with others, framing stories or incidents in ways that cast her in a favorable light while creating tension or confusion among Serena's social circle. It wasn't aggressive, not in the traditional sense, but it was effective. By carefully curating information and strategically sharing details, Meghan maintained the appearance of innocence while subtly controlling perceptions. For Serena, who valued authenticity above all, this was a quiet alarm bell ringing continuously. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted was charming everyone else, but subtly undermining you at the same time? Serena found herself asking this repeatedly, questioning whether her instincts were overreacting or whether she had finally recognized the truth. The more she observed, the more she realized that the seemingly small actions were part of a broader pattern. There was intent behind the gestures, calculation behind the compliments, and strategy behind the positioning. And for Serena, that realization was both illuminating and alarming. One particularly vivid example of these early red flags occurred during a joint media interview. On camera, Meghan was poised, articulate, and supportive. Off camera, however, the dynamics were different. Meghan would subtly interrupt Serena, reframe questions, and guide the conversation to highlight her own insights while minimizing Serena's points. It wasn't malicious in the overt sense. It was subtle, invisible to the casual observer, and devastatingly effective. Serena left that interview unsettled, questioning why she had felt diminished in a context that should have been collaborative. Even Serena's personal reflections revealed patterns. She noticed how Meghan would casually reference past successes or decisions in ways that implied Serena had acted inadequately without her guidance. These weren't direct insults. They were subtle implications, almost invisible, but enough to create internal conflict. Serena, who had spent her life building confidence, resilience, and intuition, felt the disorienting effect of someone capable of shaping perception quietly, invisibly, yet powerfully. It was during a small, private gathering of close friends that the first serious confrontation loomed. Meghan made a comment about Serena's handling of a charity initiative, framing her decisions as reactive rather than strategic. Serena, who had poured time and effort into planning the initiative, was stunned. She realized that the pattern she had observed over months, subtle manipulations, strategic compliments, and quiet steering of perception, was not coincidental. Meghan was actively influencing narratives, creating doubt, and establishing control, all under the guise of friendship. Serena tried to address it diplomatically at first, choosing her words carefully, speaking privately with Meghan about the concerns she had. But Meghan's response was subtle deflection, reframing Serena's observations as misunderstandings or oversensitivities. It was a tactic Serena had seen in other contexts, skilled, almost invisible, and frustratingly effective. The incident left Serena unsettled, recognizing that the early red flags were not isolated incidents. They were evidence of a consistent, calculated pattern. By the end of this chapter, Serena had begun to see the friendship in a new light. The casual admiration, mutual support, and charm that initially drew her in were interwoven with strategic influence, subtle control, and psychological manipulation. Serena's instincts, honed through years of professional and personal challenges, were ringing alarm bells. The friendship that had once seemed empowering now felt precarious, laced with hidden agendas. And the realization that she would soon have to confront these issues, both privately and publicly, cast a shadow over what had once been a promising connection. But just when Serena thought she had identified the extent of these manipulations, something happened that would make her pause in disbelief. An incident so calculated, so precise, that it revealed Meghan's capability for manipulation in a completely new light. It wasn't public yet, and most would never see it, but Serena did, and it changed everything. What happens when the subtle hints of manipulation become undeniable, unavoidable, and impossible to ignore? For Serena Williams, the moment of reckoning came not in the public eye, not on a red carpet, and not through social media gossip. It came face to face, in a private confrontation that left her shaken, bewildered, and forced to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about Meghan Markle. The confrontation began innocuously enough. Serena had invited Meghan to a private lunch, a neutral setting where friends could speak candidly, without the glare of cameras or the pressure of public performance. The purpose was simple. Serena wanted clarity. She wanted to address the growing pattern of behavior she had observed, the subtle manipulations, the carefully orchestrated compliments, and the hidden redirections of influence. She wanted to understand Meghan's perspective, to hear if there was any truth to the dissonance she had felt. What she encountered, however, went far beyond anything she had anticipated. The moment they sat down, the tension was palpable, though neither said it outright. Meghan greeted Serena with her trademark poise and charm, smiling warmly, offering light conversation. But Serena noticed immediately the slight, almost imperceptible undertones. A pause here, a calculated compliment there, a shift in body language designed to project innocence while subtly asserting dominance. Serena had learned to read such subtleties over years of high-pressure tennis matches, media scrutiny, and navigating celebrity dynamics. She sensed that Meghan's every word and gesture was carefully crafted, that the conversation itself was a stage for influence rather than a simple exchange of ideas. Serena started cautiously, bringing up a few minor incidents that had lingered in her mind. She phrased her words carefully, emphasizing her desire for honesty, transparency, and mutual respect. At first, Meghan responded with apparent understanding, nodding thoughtfully and offering reassurances. Serena, momentarily relieved, wondered if perhaps the dissonance she had perceived was the result of miscommunication or overthinking. But that relief was short-lived. As the conversation progressed, Meghan began to employ the very tactics Serena had been observing for months. Subtle reframing of past events, redirection of focus, and a soft insinuation that Serena's concerns were exaggerated. Serena recognized it immediately. She had seen this pattern in other contexts, in high-stakes negotiations, and even in matches where mental fortitude was key. Meghan's method was psychological precision. She didn't confront or attack. She redirected, reframed, and subtly undermined without ever appearing aggressive. At a pivotal moment, Serena raised a particularly sensitive issue: the public perception of their friendship and Meghan's influence over mutual friends and collaborators. She explained how certain comments, gestures, and subtle manipulations had caused confusion, tension, and even misalignment among those close to both of them. The room went quiet. Meghan's expression remained composed, but Serena noticed the slight tightening of her jaw, a micro-expression of annoyance, or perhaps calculation. It was the moment Serena realized that this confrontation was no longer about seeking clarity. It was about testing boundaries and measuring Serena's response. Serena, however, refused to be swayed. She had built a career on resilience, focus, and strategic thinking. She knew how to assert herself without compromising her principles. She held her ground, calmly yet firmly articulating her observations and feelings. But Meghan, in a move that was both subtle and powerful, began to escalate the psychological complexity of the exchange. She recounted past interactions, selectively framing events to cast herself as reasonable, supportive, and even wronged. Serena, who had always valued fairness, immediately recognized the tactic. Meghan was controlling the narrative in real time, attempting to shift the burden of guilt and doubt onto Serena. Have you ever faced someone who could turn the simplest conversation into a psychological battlefield? Serena had. And in that moment, the stakes were clear. This confrontation wasn't just about friendship. It was about influence, perception, and power. Every word, every pause, every carefully timed gesture was a move in a larger game that Serena had only recently begun to understand. The room felt charged with tension, almost electric, as if each sentence carried weight far beyond the immediate conversation. The turning point of the confrontation came when Meghan made a comment that Serena perceived as crossing a line. It was subtle, wrapped in politeness and charm, but the implication was unmistakable. Serena's judgment, her decisions, and her influence were being questioned. Not directly, not overtly, but insinuated in a way that forced Serena to confront the reality she had been sensing for months. The trust that had once been the foundation of their friendship was being undermined in real time, and Serena felt a surge of disbelief mixed with anger. For a brief moment, Serena considered walking away. She could have ended the conversation, allowed the tension to dissolve, and returned to the relative safety of her private life. But Serena, ever principled and courageous, chose to address it head-on. She articulated, with precision and conviction, exactly what she had observed, exactly how it had affected her, and exactly what she needed in terms of accountability. It was a courageous move, one that required vulnerability, self-awareness, and strategic thinking all at once. Meghan's response was layered. On one hand, she maintained composure, projecting empathy and reason. On the other, there was a subtle undercurrent of manipulation, an attempt to reframe the narrative, to suggest that Serena's observations were misinterpretations, that her feelings were misplaced, and that the public perception of events could be shifted with careful explanation. Serena saw it immediately. This was not apology or understanding. It was control disguised as reconciliation. The emotional weight of the confrontation hit Serena in waves. There was shock at the revelation of how meticulously Meghan could influence perception. There was disappointment in realizing the depth of strategic behavior behind what she had initially perceived as friendship. And there was fear, a quiet but persistent sense that remaining silent would allow this pattern to continue unchecked, not just in her interactions, but potentially in the broader social and professional circles they shared. By the end of the lunch, Serena walked away with clarity, but also with a sense of inevitability. She knew that this confrontation had altered the trajectory of their friendship irrevocably. The subtle red flags she had observed were not anomalies. They were deliberate, consistent, and escalating. The realization was sobering. She could no longer view the relationship through the lens of casual friendship. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and the consequences of inaction were now apparent. Have you ever had to confront someone you trusted, only to realize that the person you believed you knew was entirely different beneath the surface? Serena had. And in that confrontation, she gained a profound understanding of Meghan's capabilities: strategic, calculated, and capable of influencing perception in ways that were almost invisible. It was a revelation that shook her, not because it was unexpected, but because it was undeniable. And yet, as Serena walked away from that encounter, she knew that the most intense moments were still ahead. What she had learned in private would soon collide with the public sphere, and the consequences of this confrontation would reverberate far beyond the lunch table. Friendships would be tested, alliances would shift, and public perception, carefully curated for years, would face scrutiny like never before. But just when Serena thought she had processed the gravity of this confrontation, the next revelation hit. A detail so precise, so calculated, that it revealed an entirely new level of strategy and manipulation. It wasn't public yet, and few would ever see it, but Serena did, and it would set the stage for a dramatic unraveling that no one could anticipate. How far would someone go to control perception, influence behavior, and shape narratives, all while maintaining the image of a supportive friend? For Serena Williams, the answer became painfully clear over time. Meghan Markle's manipulative tactics were not isolated incidents or harmless misunderstandings. They were calculated, consistent, and designed to give Meghan influence over every aspect of their interactions, both public and private. Serena, who had prided herself on intuition and discernment, began to see a pattern that was both intricate and unsettling. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, with small remarks and carefully timed compliments. On the surface, Meghan's words were flattering, encouraging, and supportive. But beneath the surface, there was always a strategic undertone, a redirection of attention, a subtle undermining of confidence, or a reframing of events in Meghan's favor. For example, when Serena discussed a recent philanthropic initiative she had spearheaded, Meghan would commend her work but immediately juxtapose it with her own efforts, implicitly suggesting that Serena's accomplishments were incomplete without Meghan's guidance or validation. The compliment was real enough on the surface, but the underlying message was clear. Influence and recognition were contingent on Meghan's approval. Serena noticed how Meghan would carefully manage public perception through media interactions. Interviews, appearances, and social media posts were all subtly curated. Meghan was adept at framing narratives, ensuring that attention gravitated toward her without overtly diminishing Serena. To the casual observer, it appeared as friendship and mutual support. But Serena recognized the invisible strings, the carefully chosen words, the strategic pauses, the subtle redirection of focus. It was psychological mastery, appearing innocent while quietly asserting control. One striking example occurred during a joint media interview with a well-known lifestyle publication. Both women were asked about their collaborative charitable work. On camera, Meghan was poised, articulate, and genuinely engaging. Serena, however, noticed how Meghan skillfully answered questions in a way that positioned her as the visionary leader while subtly casting Serena in a secondary role. It wasn't overt or aggressive. It was almost invisible to viewers. But for Serena, who had developed an acute sense of perception through years of high-pressure athletic and media environments, it was unmistakable. Meghan's tactics were subtle but highly effective. The public narrative was gently guided toward Meghan's favor without creating overt conflict. Manipulation extended beyond media appearances. In private interactions, Meghan often employed what Serena describes as empathy as leverage. On the surface, Meghan would appear caring, attentive, and supportive. She asked about Serena's thoughts, listened intently, and validated feelings, but always with an underlying purpose. When a decision didn't align with Meghan's intentions, she would subtly frame the situation in a way that shifted responsibility onto Serena. It was a methodical approach. Make the other person feel understood, then gently introduce doubt or suggestion that subtly guides behavior in the desired direction. Serena experienced this firsthand, sometimes questioning her own judgment as a result. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Meghan's tactics was her ability to influence mutual acquaintances and allies. Serena noticed how Meghan would carefully seed narratives with others in their social and professional circles. Stories were reframed, minor incidents exaggerated or minimized, all in a way that positioned Meghan favorably while quietly undermining Serena. Friends and collaborators began to respond differently. sometimes unconsciously aligning with Meghan's subtle framing. For Serena, this created an invisible pressure, a realization that not only was she being influenced, but those around her were subtly guided as well. A particularly revealing incident occurred during a charity planning meeting. Both Serena and Meghan were responsible for organizing a high-profile fundraising event. Meghan suggested adjustments, phrased in a supportive tone, that strategically shifted credit toward herself while minimizing Serena's contributions. On the surface, it appeared collaborative, even amicable. But Serena immediately recognized the pattern. This was not collaboration, it was influence. Every recommendation was calculated to enhance Meghan's image, maintain control over the narrative, and ensure Serena's efforts were always framed within the context of Meghan's guidance. What made these tactics so effective was Meghan's skill at disguising intent. Compliments were genuine in tone, suggestions framed as support, and disagreements carefully masked with politeness. The manipulation was layered, nuanced, and almost invisible to those who weren't paying close attention. Serena, who had always relied on intuition and observation, realized she needed to remain vigilant. Otherwise, the subtle tactics could quietly erode confidence, autonomy, and influence. Have you ever encountered someone who could simultaneously charm an entire room while controlling every interaction behind the scenes? That was Meghan in these moments. Serena watched carefully as Meghan orchestrated dynamics with precision, managing attention, influencing allies, and controlling perception, all while appearing to be the most supportive, understanding friend imaginable. It was a level of psychological sophistication that few could detect, and Serena, with her keen instincts, understood it immediately. Even in casual, off-the-record interactions, the pattern persisted. Meghan would raise seemingly trivial points, questions about how Serena handled certain situations, comments about mutual friends, or reflections on public perception, but each statement carried a subtle directive. The phrasing was always soft, almost imperceptible, but the intent was clear. Shape Serena's thinking, influence decisions, and guide behavior. Serena realized that this was not mere coincidence or charm. It was manipulation executed with precision, expertise, and long-term strategic intent. The cumulative effect of these tactics began to weigh heavily on Serena. She noticed that her own confidence, usually unshakable, was subtly impacted. She questioned her decisions, reconsidered her approaches, and even second-guessed her instincts. This is the hallmark of advanced manipulation. It doesn't rely on overt force or confrontation. It quietly erodes certainty, instills doubt, and reshapes behavior without the subject realizing it until patterns are undeniable. Another striking example involved joint appearances with mutual friends. Meghan would carefully redirect questions, highlight specific achievements, or frame anecdotes in ways that elevated her image while subtly casting Serena in a reactive role. Friends noticed the dynamics, some subconsciously aligning with Meghan's framing without even recognizing it. Serena began to understand the magnitude of influence. It wasn't just about their private interactions, it extended to a broader social ecosystem, affecting relationships, perceptions, and reputations. Despite the subtlety, Serena's instincts never faltered. She cataloged behaviors, recognized patterns, and began connecting the dots. Meghan's tactics were sophisticated, multi-layered, and relentless. Each compliment, each suggestion, each carefully framed story was a deliberate attempt to maintain control over the narrative, over perception, and, ultimately, over Serena herself. It was a revelation that left Serena both impressed by the psychological precision and deeply unsettled by the implications. Have you ever realized that someone you trusted was quietly steering not just your choices, but the perception of everyone around you? Serena experienced that shock firsthand. She understood that the tactics were not just minor manipulations. They were strategic, continuous, and designed to maintain influence over both her personal and professional life. And the realization came with a heavy emotional weight. Betrayal, disappointment, and the sobering understanding that public appearances of friendship often mask private strategies of control. By the end of this period, Serena recognized a clear pattern. Meghan's manipulative tactics were deliberate, calculated, and consistent. They were not isolated incidents or accidental missteps. They were part of a broader strategy, one designed to influence perception, maintain control, and guide behavior subtly but effectively. The revelation was both illuminating and disturbing. She was dealing with someone who possessed extraordinary social intelligence, psychological acumen, and the ability to influence outcomes without overt confrontation. And yet, the most unsettling realization was still ahead. Serena knew that understanding these tactics in private was only the beginning. The real challenge would emerge when these dynamics collided with the public sphere, when perception, media narratives, and social influence amplified Meghan's calculated strategies. Serena's next steps would require courage, clarity, and a willingness to confront not just behavior, but intent, consequence, and impact on a much larger scale. But just when Serena thought she had a handle on the scope of Meghan's manipulations, a revelation surfaced that exposed an entirely new level of strategy. A move so calculated and precise that it changed everything Serena believed about the friendship. Few would ever know it, and fewer still could anticipate the consequences, but Serena did, and it would set the stage for a confrontation that no one could ignore. What happens when private manipulation spills into the public eye, affecting not just personal relationships, but an entire industry? For Serena Williams, the private realizations about Meghan Markle's tactics were one thing. But the moment those dynamics began to ripple through Hollywood, the consequences became far more serious, far more dramatic, and far more public than anyone could have anticipated. The first whispers started quietly, almost imperceptibly, among mutual acquaintances in the entertainment and philanthropic circles they shared. Friends noticed subtle changes in behavior, small comments that seemed off, or actions that contradicted previously established norms. Initially, these murmurs were dismissed as gossip, minor misunderstandings, or the unavoidable friction that sometimes occurs between high-profile individuals. But as Serena began to share her concerns with trusted allies, carefully, selectively, the pattern became undeniable. Meghan's influence extended beyond their private friendship. It had infiltrated social networks, professional collaborations, and even public perception. Hollywood is a world built on relationships, optics, and reputation. Serena, who had navigated it successfully for decades, understood this better than most. In an environment where influence can shape careers overnight, subtle manipulation can have outsized consequences. Friends began approaching Serena with small confessions. "Did you notice how she phrased that?" Or, "I wasn't sure how to respond to that comment she made about you." What initially seemed minor now appeared to be part of a broader strategy. A web of influence that could quietly shift narratives, control attention, and manipulate perception in ways that affected not just friendships, but public image and professional credibility. A particularly striking example occurred at a major industry event, a charity gala in Los Angeles. The event was intended to celebrate accomplishments and fundraise for important causes, but Serena noticed how Meghan managed interactions with subtle precision. She guided conversations, positioned herself at the center of key networking moments, and influenced the flow of attention. Guests were subtly directed to focus on Meghan's initiatives, while Serena's contributions were quietly reframed as supportive rather than central. On the surface, it appeared collaborative. Behind the scenes, it was manipulation executed flawlessly. Have you ever experienced someone who could charm an entire room while quietly controlling every interaction? That was Meghan in these situations. Her charisma was undeniable, her social intelligence extraordinary, and her ability to influence perception was almost invisible to those who weren't paying attention. Serena recognized this immediately, and it unnerved her. The realization was clear. The stakes were no longer limited to private friendship. This was a game of influence with far-reaching consequences. As the ripple effects grew, Serena began noticing changes among mutual collaborators and allies. Some began to behave differently, subtly shifting loyalties, or echoing Meghan's framing of events without realizing it. The more Serena observed, the more she recognized a pattern of influence that extended far beyond her immediate interactions. It wasn't just about personal gain. It was about controlling the narrative, shaping public perception, and quietly guiding others' behavior in a way that elevated Meghan while subtly undermining Serena. The media, too, played a role. Meghan had a way of leveraging public appearances, interviews, and social media posts to reinforce the narratives she wanted to dominate. Headlines highlighted her initiatives, praised her insights, and amplified her accomplishments. Serena's achievements were still recognized, but often in a supporting context, framed in a way that elevated Meghan as the central figure. It was subtle, sophisticated, and highly effective. Serena's realization was sobering. Private dynamics were now amplified by public perception, creating a layered strategy of influence that few could detect, but many would feel. The Hollywood repercussions didn't stop at perception alone. They began to influence tangible opportunities. Invitations to projects, collaborations, and speaking engagements were subtly redirected. Serena noticed that decisions that should have been based purely on merit were increasingly affected by Meghan's influence and framing. These weren't overt acts of sabotage. They were quiet nudges, carefully orchestrated, designed to shape outcomes without attracting scrutiny. For someone like Serena, whose career had been built on discipline, skill, and strategic focus, the subtlety of these tactics was both impressive and alarming. Friends and colleagues began to share stories that reinforced Serena's concerns. A producer would mention a conversation Meghan had had with them, framing it in a way that positioned Serena as reactive or indecisive. A mutual friend would casually echo Meghan's perspective, unaware that they were amplifying a carefully constructed narrative. Each incident added weight to Serena's understanding. The private manipulation she had experienced was now influencing public dynamics, professional opportunities, and social alliances. The scope of Meghan's influence was greater than Serena had initially imagined, and the implications were profound. Emotional stakes intensified. Serena had always valued integrity, transparency, and authenticity. Watching this subtle manipulation extend into Hollywood circles caused frustration, disappointment, and even anger. She felt the tension between maintaining professionalism and protecting herself from unseen influence. It became clear that private confrontations alone would not suffice. The manipulation was too subtle, too pervasive, and too strategically executed to ignore. Serena realized she needed to maintain vigilance, document patterns, and prepare for a response that protected her reputation, her work, and her personal boundaries. The ripple effects also revealed another layer. Public perception could be influenced without direct action. Meghan's charisma, strategic framing, and control over narratives created an environment in which others would unwittingly participate. Allies would echo her framing. Journalists would report narratives shaped by carefully curated statements, and fans would consume content influenced by subtle positioning. Serena observed all of this with acute awareness. The realization was both enlightening and disturbing. Manipulation in private spaces could extend invisibly into public domains, with real-world consequences. The culmination of these Hollywood repercussions occurred during a collaborative charity event that was widely covered by the media. Serena had meticulously planned her role, ensuring her initiatives were highlighted. Yet Meghan's strategic interventions, timed comments, carefully framed public remarks, and controlled appearances shifted attention in subtle ways. Coverage emphasized Meghan's insights, accolades, and contributions, while Serena's work, though recognized, was consistently framed as complimentary. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to most observers, but to Serena, it was unmistakable. Meghan had mastered the art of influence, blending charisma with strategy to control both perception and outcome. By the end of this period, Serena recognized that the stakes had escalated dramatically. What had begun as private manipulations now had tangible consequences in Hollywood. Perceptions were shaped, opportunities were influenced, and relationships were subtly redirected. The personal betrayal intertwined with professional implications created a profound tension, one that Serena could neither ignore nor navigate passively. Have you ever watched someone quietly orchestrate outcomes around you while maintaining the illusion of support? That was Serena's reality. She understood the intricacies of influence, the subtle power of strategic positioning, and the high stakes of public perception. She recognized that what Meghan was doing was not just clever. It was impactful, far-reaching, and potentially destructive. And just when Serena thought she had seen the full extent of Meghan's influence, a new layer emerged. An incident so revealing, so meticulously orchestrated that it exposed the lengths to which Meghan would go to control both public and private narratives. This revelation would escalate the conflict, force Serena to make difficult decisions, and set the stage for confrontations and disclosures that would captivate the world. What happens when someone as private, disciplined, and meticulous as Serena Williams finally decides to speak publicly about a betrayal that's been festering behind the scenes? For years, Serena had been silent, processing, observing, and cataloging incidents in her mind, weighing the consequences of speaking out. But the tipping point had arrived. Meghan Markle's manipulative tactics were no longer confined to private moments. They had spilled into public perception, influenced friends and collaborators, and created a ripple effect Serena could not ignore. The silence had to end. The decision to go public was not made lightly. Serena, who had navigated intense media scrutiny throughout her career, understood the risks: public backlash, misinterpretation, sensationalized headlines, and the potential for personal attacks. She also knew that timing was critical. Too early, and the story could be dismissed as a fleeting grievance. Too late, and the narrative would be shaped entirely by Meghan. But Serena's instinct, honed over years of high-pressure tennis matches and navigating the media spotlight, told her this was the moment. The story needed to be told, and she needed to tell it herself. Her public statement was crafted with precision. Serena chose her words carefully, direct, firm, and unmistakable. She acknowledged her past friendship with Meghan, the admiration she had initially felt, and the collaboration they had shared. But then she pivoted, revealing the reality behind the smiles and social appearances. She described Meghan's behavior as manipulative, strategic, and, most importantly, dangerous. Serena didn't mince words. She wanted the world to understand that this was not a matter of petty gossip or jealousy. It was a calculated pattern of influence and control that had real consequences. The impact of Serena's statement was immediate. Social media exploded. Fans, journalists, and influencers shared and debated every word. Headlines across entertainment news read variations of "Serena speaks out" and "Williams calls out Meghan." The timing was explosive. It coincided with other public discussions about celebrity influence, social manipulation, and the hidden pressures of Hollywood life. The statement was not just news, it was a cultural moment, forcing the public to reassess both Serena's experiences and Meghan's carefully curated persona. Have you ever spoken your truth, knowing that it could change how the world sees you and someone else? Serena had, and it was both liberating and terrifying. The weight of years of observation, doubt, and emotional processing was lifted, but it came with the immediate burden of public scrutiny. Every word she had chosen, every sentence carefully constructed, was now being dissected by the media and analyzed by millions of viewers. The public statement also revealed Serena's strategic thinking. She didn't attack Meghan personally, nor did she attempt to shame her outright. Instead, she framed the revelation around patterns of behavior, subtle manipulations, strategic influence, and the impact on Serena and others within their shared social and professional circles. By focusing on the actions rather than the person, Serena highlighted the seriousness of the situation while maintaining her own integrity and credibility. The approach was classic Serena, measured, authoritative, and impossible to dismiss. The response was intense and multifaceted. Supporters praised Serena's courage, applauding her willingness to speak out despite the potential backlash. Some former colleagues and friends subtly confirmed similar experiences, adding weight to Serena's revelations. At the same time, critics emerged, questioning her motives, analyzing her phrasing, and speculating on potential exaggeration. The public debate was fierce, fueled by social media platforms, news outlets, and celebrity commentators. Yet through it all, Serena's message remained clear. Manipulation had occurred, patterns were consistent, and the public deserved to understand the truth. Serena's statement also had personal repercussions. Friends and collaborators reached out privately, expressing shock, support, or sometimes doubt. The dynamics of her professional network shifted as people reconsidered their alliances and observed the unfolding story. For Serena, this was both validating and disorienting. She had anticipated some backlash, but the speed and intensity of the response exceeded her expectations. The public exposure amplified not only the story itself, but also the underlying emotional weight of betrayal, trust, and influence. The emotional impact on Serena was profound. Speaking publicly about someone she had once admired, trusted, and collaborated with was not easy. The process required courage, self-reflection, and an understanding of personal boundaries. Serena had invested time, energy, and emotional resources into the friendship, and acknowledging the betrayal in public was a moment of vulnerability. Yet, the release of her truth was also empowering. It marked a reclaiming of agency, a refusal to remain silent in the face of manipulation, and a public declaration that her experiences were valid and significant. Have you ever faced a moment where silence was no longer an option, and speaking up meant risking everything you had built? Serena's statement was that moment. It was a culmination of years of observation, reflection, and emotional processing. By choosing to speak, Serena not only protected her own integrity, but also set a precedent for others who might be navigating similar dynamics in high-pressure, high-visibility environments. The statement also introduced a new layer of tension: Meghan's potential response. The public revelation was a challenge, one that could not be ignored. Serena's words had changed the narrative, shifted perception, and disrupted carefully curated images. The question on everyone's mind was how Meghan would react, and whether her response would confirm, deny, or further complicate the unfolding story. The uncertainty added a dramatic layer to the public discourse, leaving fans, media outlets, and collaborators on edge. Finally, the impact of the statement rippled beyond Hollywood. Observers outside the entertainment industry recognized the broader implications: how influence, manipulation, and strategic behavior operate in social networks, professional collaborations, and public perception. Serena's experience became a lens through which the public could examine it.